April 6, 1945. The sky above Okinawa was not blue, had not been blue for days, would not be blue for months. Gray smoke veiled everything thick as wool, carrying the stench of cordite and burning vegetation and things that had once been human but were now just meat rotting in the volcanic soil. Private James Sullivan trudged through mud that sucked at his boots with every step. The mud was red, not the red of Texas clay back home, but the red of earth mixed with blood and rain and the residue of 10,000 artillery shells. He was 24 years old, had been a farmer in the hill country outside Austin before the draft notice arrived in January of 1943, had grown cotton and corn, had known the names of every cow on his father's small ranch, had never fired a weapon in anger until the Marines put him through boot camp and discovered he could not stomach killing but could stomach everything that came after. So they made him a medic, gave him a satchel instead of a rifle, filled it with morphine syrettes, sulfa powder, bandages, tourniquets, in a small notebook where he wrote the names of men he treated, the ones who lived, the ones who died, the ones whose faces he would see in dreams for the rest of his life. He had landed on the beaches of Okinawa with the 10th Army on April 1st. Love Day, they called it. Some joke from command naming the invasion after Easter Sunday and calling it love when it was anything but. The Japanese had not contested the beaches, had let the Americans land unopposed, then waited until they pushed inland and unleashed hell from caves and ridges and fortified positions that had been prepared for months. General Simon Bolivar Buckner commanded the ground forces. Admiral Raymond Spruance commanded the naval support. Between them, they had assembled the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater. Over 180,000 troops, 1,500 ships offshore, air support that could darken the sky. And facing them, General Mitsuru Ushijima, with perhaps 100,000 Japanese defenders who had been ordered to resist until the last breath, to bleed the Americans so badly they would reconsider invading Japan itself. James understood none of the grand strategy. He only understood that men were dying faster than he could save them, that every ridge taken cost hundreds of casualties, that the Japanese fought with a ferocity that bordered on fanaticism, soldiers charging machine gun positions with bayonets, fixed civilians throwing themselves from cliffs rather than surrender the entire island, soaked in an ideology that saw death as preferable to dishonor. It was near a half-collapsed field hospital, a building that had been a schoolhouse before the war and was now just broken walls and a roof with holes that let in rain, that James first saw her. She stood among a group of perhaps 20 captured civilians and non-combatants. Most were old men and women, a few children, and 3 young women wearing the simple gray uniforms of medical auxiliaries, pressed into service by the Imperial Army to tend wounded Japanese soldiers because there were never enough doctors, never enough supplies, never enough of anything except orders to fight and die with honor. Her name, as he would learn days later, was Yuki Nakamura, 21 years old, daughter of a school teacher from Nahai who had died in the pre-invasion bombardment. Her mother had died years earlier from illness. Yuki had been studying to become a nurse when the war consumed everything. Now she stood in the mud, exhausted, covered in dust and dried blood that was not her own eyes fixed on the ground. James noticed her immediately, though he could not have said why. Perhaps because she was young, perhaps because while the others looked beaten down by fear and exhaustion, she held herself with a strange dignity, shoulders back despite obvious fatigue, face expressionless, but not broken. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple knot. Her hands, visible below the sleeves of the gray uniform, were rough with work but steady. Sergeant Hayes, a thick-necked man from Pennsylvania who had been fighting since Guadalcanal, barked orders. "Medic, check them. Make sure nobody's hiding weapons. Make sure nobody's about to die on us before we get them processed." James approached cautiously. The Marines had drilled warnings into every soldier. Japanese prisoners sometimes carried grenades, sometimes had concealed knives or razor blades, sometimes waited until Americans came close and then detonated explosives hidden in clothing, taking their captors with them into death. But as James looked at this group, looked at exhausted civilians and 3 young women barely out of their teens, he saw no threat. Just people who had survived something terrible and were now facing an uncertain future in the hands of enemies they had been taught were monsters. He raised his hand slowly, palm out, showing he carried no weapon, made eye contact with the group. Some flinched, others stared with flat affect. Yuki looked at him for 1 second, then away. But in that second, James saw not hatred or fear, but something else. Assessment, intelligence, the look of someone evaluating a situation and calculating survival. Water, James asked. He knew perhaps 10 words of Japanese, had learned them from a Navy interpreter in the days before landing. Water was mizu, food was tabumono, sick was byoki, pain was itai. He pointed to his canteen, made a drinking gesture. Yuki did not respond. Perhaps she did not understand his accent. Perhaps she refused to accept anything from an enemy. Perhaps she was simply too exhausted to care. James set the canteen down on a piece of broken concrete, stepped back, made a gesture that he hoped conveyed it was theirs if they wanted it. An old woman shuffled forward and took the canteen. Drank, passed it to others. Yuki waited until everyone else had drunk before taking a sip herself. James noticed that, the small act of selflessness or discipline or whatever motivated someone to put others first, even in extremity. Over the following days, James was assigned to monitor the prisoner group. They were housed in a cordoned section of the ruined school, given minimal rations, treated for injuries and illnesses, processed for eventual transfer to larger holding facilities. The military needed information about Japanese positions, troop movements, defensive preparations. But mostly these civilians knew nothing useful. They had been caught in the machinery of war, had no intelligence value, were just obstacles to be managed. James checked on them twice daily, brought medical supplies, treated minor wounds and ailments, changed bandages, distributed water. The interactions were minimal. Most prisoners would not speak to him. The ones who did spoke only when necessary, answering his broken Japanese with single-word responses or gestures. Yuki never spoke. She helped the elderly, assisted with the children. When James brought supplies, she would accept them with a small nod. Nothing more. Her face remained expressionless. But James noticed things, small things. How she whispered comfort to an old man dying from untreated infection. How she pressed her palms together before eating the meager rations, a brief prayer to ancestors or gods. How she stiffened whenever American aircraft thundered overhead, body tensing as if expecting bombs. She was the enemy. He understood that intellectually. She had aided Japanese soldiers, had been part of the military machine that had bombed Pearl Harbor, that had committed atrocities across Asia, that was fighting with such savage determination that Marines were starting to question whether any Japanese would ever surrender or if they would all choose death. Yet she seemed achingly human. That was what disturbed James most. Not the obvious humanity of the elderly or children, but this young woman who should have been his peer in any other world, who might have been a nurse in a hospital, tending patients with competence and compassion, who instead was trapped in this hell through no choice of her own. He wrote in his notebook one night by flickering candlelight. The entry was different from his usual medical notations. April 11th, 1945. I do not know if she hates me or fears me. Probably both. She keeps distance but does not flinch when I check her for injuries. There is something in her eyes, not surrender, something quieter. Maybe she is braver than I will ever be. Maybe survival takes more courage than fighting. I do not know. He tore out the page immediately, worried someone would see it, would question why a medic was writing personal observations about a prisoner, would think he was compromised, losing objectivity, forgetting which side he was on. Among his fellow soldiers, suspicion of all Japanese ran deep as bone marrow. Tommy Brennan, an Irish kid from Boston, who always had a bitter joke ready, muttered constant warnings. Careful, Tex. You patch her up nice, and she will stick a knife in your throat first chance she gets. They are all fanatics, every single one. Others echoed the sentiment. The Japanese were not like other enemies, not like Germans who would surrender when the situation became hopeless. These people fought until death, charged machine guns, blew themselves up rather than be captured, convinced civilians to commit suicide rather than face the shame of American occupation. How could you trust any of them? How could you see them as human when they clearly did not value human life? James said nothing to these arguments, just continued his work. But he found himself watching Yuki when he thought no one else was looking. Noticed the way she cared for others despite her own obvious exhaustion. The way she organized the limited supplies to maximize everyone's benefit. The way she maintained dignity in circumstances designed to strip dignity away. One evening while tending to a teenage boy who had developed fever from an infected wound, James saw Yuki kneel beside the boy. She had no medicine, no clean water, just a piece of cloth she had somehow managed to keep relatively clean. She dipped it in the communal water bucket and pressed it to the boy's forehead, began humming softly, a lullaby. Something Japanese that James did not recognize but understood instinctively, because mothers sang such songs everywhere in every language to comfort children who were suffering. The sound cut through the distant rumble of artillery, through the shouts of Marines preparing for the next assault, through all the machinery of war. Just a young woman humming to a sick boy, offering the only comfort she could provide, which was presence and care, and the message that he was not alone. James felt something shift in his chest, not attraction, not yet. Something more fundamental. Recognition that whatever ideology or propaganda separated them, whatever uniforms they wore or languages they spoke beneath it all, they were the same. Both trying to ease suffering, both trapped in circumstances beyond their control, both human in a world that seemed designed to strip away humanity. The battle raged outside. Marines advanced yard by bloody yard into the ridges. The Japanese defenders fought from caves and tunnels, emerging to attack and then disappearing like ghosts. Casualties mounted. The field hospital overflowed. The prisoner compound became a footnote, a minor administrative concern, while larger operations consumed all attention. But within the crude walls of that compound, something fragile was taking shape, something neither command structure nor military doctrine could account for. A connection, recognition. Two people on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide who somehow looked across and saw not enemy, but mirror. James began finding excuses to check on the prisoners more frequently, bringing extra medical supplies, staying longer than necessary. He told himself it was professionalism, making sure no prisoner died from preventable illness, maintaining proper medical oversight. But he knew it was more than that. Yuki began watching for his arrivals, never acknowledged him directly, never spoke unless absolutely necessary. But James noticed she positioned herself where he could see her, made sure he observed how she cared for others, as if demonstrating that she too was trying to preserve life in circumstances that seemed dedicated to destroying it. They existed in a strange bubble. Outside, men killed each other with rifles and grenades and flamethrowers. Inside, they performed a careful dance of mutual recognition constrained by fear ideology and the knowledge that any genuine connection would be seen as betrayal by everyone around them. 10 days after the initial capture, Yuki spoke to him. Just one word. Arigato. Thank you. She said it so quietly he almost missed it. Was checking the bandage on an old woman's arm. The woman had developed infection. James had brought sulfa powder. Yuki watched him apply it with professional efficiency, and when he finished, she said that one word, then looked away quickly as if the acknowledgement itself was dangerous. James felt his heart accelerate, not from fear, from something else, from the recognition that the barrier between them had fractured. Just slightly, just enough to let one word through. But that word carried weight, carried the acknowledgement that he was not just an enemy soldier, but a person doing something that deserved thanks. He nodded, did not try to respond in Japanese, just nodded to show he heard, understood, accepted, then left the compound before anyone noticed the exchange had been anything more than routine medical interaction. That night, he wrote another entry in his notebook. She said thank you today in Japanese. First time she has spoken directly to me. I do not know what it means, probably nothing, just politeness. But it felt like more, like maybe she sees me the same way I see her, as someone trapped in this machinery trying to stay human. I should not be thinking like this, should not care, but I do. Again he tore out the page, but this time he kept it, folded small and tucked in his pocket. Physical evidence of something he could not yet name, but could not deny. The weather grew worse. April rains turned the island into a quagmire. Fighting slowed. Artillery continued day and night. The wounded kept coming. The dead accumulated. And in the strange suspended animation of the prisoner compound, James Sullivan, and Yuki Nakamura continued their silent dance of recognition, constrained by every rule and convention that said they should be enemies. Yet somehow finding a connection neither could explain or justify, but both knew was real. Outside the Battle of Okinawa ground forward, the bloodiest campaign of the Pacific War. But inside that compound, something else was beginning. Something that would eventually force both of them to choose between loyalty and humanity, between duty and something that looked like hope. But they did not know that yet. They were still just medic and prisoner, American and Japanese, enemy and enemy, dancing around an attraction neither dared acknowledge, building a bridge across a chasm that should have been uncrossable. The rain fell, the guns fired, and two people who should have been strangers began slowly, carefully, dangerously becoming something more. May 7th, 1945. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. Okinawa dissolved into red mud and gray sky and water that fell in sheets, turning every foxhole into a swimming pool and every path into a river of filth. The battle had intensified. Japanese forces under General Ushijima had fallen back to the Shuri Line, a defensive position of ridges and caves prepared over months to exact maximum casualties from any attacker. James Sullivan no longer wrote in his notebook every night. There were too many wounded, too many faces that blurred together in his memory, too many boys crying for mothers while their intestines spilled into mud, too many decisions about who might live and who was already dead but did not know it yet. Yet he carried the notebook still, tucked beside the bandages as if it anchored him to something beyond survival, to the idea that recording names and dates and small observations meant something, that bearing witness had value even when nothing could be saved. The assault on the Shuri defenses was brutal beyond anything James had experienced. Marines advanced into machine gun fire. Artillery fell from both sides simultaneously. Japanese soldiers emerged from caves to launch suicide attacks. The wounded came in waves that overwhelmed every medical facility. James worked without pause. Morphine in one hand, scalpel in the other. Stopping bleeding, splinting fractures, making impossible decisions about who could be saved and who should receive morphine and be made comfortable while they died. The triage process stripped away everything except animal efficiency. This one lives, this one dies. Next, next, next. In that chaos, he almost forgot about the prisoner compound, almost forgot about Yuki. But in the rare moments when exhaustion allowed thought, he found his mind returning to her, wondering if she was safe, if the compound had been hit, if she had survived the bombardments that fell randomly, killing without discrimination or purpose. The prisoners had been moved 3 times as the front line shifted. James had lost track of where they were being held, did not know if Yuki was still on Okinawa or had been transferred to a larger facility. The not knowing created an anxiety he could not justify and did not want to examine too closely. Then came the explosion that changed everything. May 23rd, evening. James was working in a field hospital that had been established in the ruins of a concrete building, treating a Marine whose leg had been shattered by a mortar round. The sky was darkening, artillery had quieted to sporadic exchanges. For a moment, something almost like peace descended. Then the scream of incoming shells, impact so close the building shook, dust and smoke, and the metallic stench of high explosive. James threw himself over the wounded Marine, protected the man's body with his own, waited for the secondary explosion that would mean they were dead. It did not come. Just silence, then shouting, then the organized chaos of people responding to attack. James looked up. Through the smoke, he could see the prisoner compound, or what remained of it. The fence had been destroyed. The small shelters where prisoners had been housed were collapsed or burning. James did not think, just ran. Medic training screamed at him to stay with the wounded, to not abandon his post, to let others handle the prisoner situation. But something stronger overrode training, something that made his legs move without permission from his brain. He pushed through smoke, jumped over debris, saw bodies, prisoners and guards both, and saw blood and fire and people screaming in Japanese and English. Saw chaos that made the regular horror of war look almost organized by comparison. Then he saw Yuki. She was stumbling, one arm hanging useless, the other pressed against her side where blood was already soaking through the gray uniform. Her face was white, shock and blood loss. She was going to collapse, going to die in the mud like so many others. James ran to her, heard shouts behind him, warnings to stay back, orders to secure the prisoners first. But he ignored everything, just ran until he reached her, caught her as her legs gave out, felt her weight in his arms. Light, too light. She looked up at him with eyes that seemed too large for her face. "Why you come?" she whispered in broken English. The first English he had ever heard her speak, the words barely audible over the ringing in his ears from the explosion. James pressed his hand against the wound in her side, felt hot blood pulsing between his fingers, arterial bleeding. She would die in minutes if he could not stop it. "Because I could not come," he said, then immediately felt stupid because that was not an answer. Or maybe it was the only answer that mattered. He lowered her to the ground, ripped open his medical bag, found pressure bandages, sulfa powder, morphine. His hands moved with practiced efficiency even while his mind screamed that this was different. This was not just another wounded soldier. This was Yuki. This mattered in a way he could not explain and did not want to examine. Tommy Brennan appeared beside him, face black with smoke and blood. "Sullivan, what the hell are you doing?" "Leave her. We have to secure the perimeter." James ignored him, packed the wound, applied pressure. Yuki gasped with pain but did not cry out, just bit her lip until blood appeared there too. Her eyes stayed on his face, searching for something. Trust maybe, or just confirmation that she was not dying alone. "Stay with me," James whispered. In English because his Japanese had fled entirely. "Stay with me, Yuki. Do not go anywhere, just stay." Her lips moved, forming words he could not hear. Her hand found his, gripped with surprising strength. And for a moment, everything else disappeared. The war, the smoke, the screams, the ideology, all of it irrelevant against the simple fact of two people connected by touch and the desperate need to survive. Other medics arrived, started working. Someone shouted that stretcher bearers were coming. James felt hands pulling him back, forcing him to release Yuki, let others take over, return to his duties. He resisted, actually physically resisted, had to be forcibly removed while Yuki was carried away on a stretcher to the field hospital. Sergeant Hayes grabbed James by the front of his uniform, shoved him against a wall. "What the hell is wrong with you, Sullivan? You abandoned wounded Americans to save a prisoner, a Japanese prisoner. Do you understand how that looks?" James stared at him, could not form words, because he understood exactly how it looked. Understood that he had crossed a line that should never be crossed, had prioritized a prisoner over his own wounded soldiers, had revealed something that he himself had not fully acknowledged until that moment. He was in love with her, with Yuki, with the enemy, with a Japanese woman he barely knew and could not communicate with, and who represented everything he was supposed to hate. He was in love, and it was the most stupid, dangerous, impossible thing he had ever felt. Hayes saw the realization on James's face, saw the admission that required no words. The sergeant's expression shifted from anger to something more complicated. Pity, maybe, or recognition. "Jesus Christ, Sullivan, you stupid kid. You have no idea what you have done." James was placed on restriction, confined to the hospital area, forbidden from visiting prisoners, watched closely by other soldiers who muttered about traitors and how you could not trust anyone who went soft on the enemy. Tommy Brennan stopped speaking to him entirely. Others treated him with the contempt reserved for those who had broken the fundamental rules of loyalty. But James did not care, because Yuki was alive. He learned that from the surgical reports. She had survived the operation. The wound had been serious but not fatal. She would recover, would be transferred to a larger prisoner facility once stable enough to move, would probably never see James again. That thought created a pain that had nothing to do with physical injury. The idea that she would disappear, that whatever connection they had found would be severed by military bureaucracy, and the simple fact that she was a prisoner and he was a soldier, and those roles could not be reconciled. 3 days later, Sergeant Hayes found James sitting alone outside the hospital. Brought 2 canteens of coffee that tasted like motor oil but was hot and caffeinated. Sat down beside him without asking permission. "I have been in this war since Guadalcanal," Hayes said. I have seen things that would make you vomit. I have done things that will keep me awake for the rest of my life. And I have learned that war takes everything. Everything. It takes your innocence, your faith, your ability to feel anything except fatigue. It takes and takes, and never gives back. He paused, drank his coffee, watched the sun setting over ridges where men were still dying. But maybe, he continued, maybe it does not have to take everything. Maybe some small part of humanity can survive. I do not know if that girl is that for you. I do not know if you are being stupid or brave or both. But war takes enough. If you can hold on to something human, even if it makes no sense, even if everyone judges you for it, maybe that is worth something. James looked at him. Are you saying I am not in trouble? Hayes laughed, bitter sound. Oh, you are in deep trouble. Command is pissed. But I told them you were suffering from combat fatigue, that you were not thinking clearly, that you need rest, not punishment. They bought it because they need every medic they can get. But Sullivan, you need to be careful, very careful. Whatever you think you feel, that girl is still the enemy. And when this war ends, there will be no place for what you want. James nodded, but he knew Hayes was wrong, or maybe right, did not matter which, because the choice had already been made. In that moment when he ran through smoke to catch Yuki as she fell, when he held her hand and begged her to stay, when he felt her grip tighten and knew with absolute certainty that losing her would hurt worse than any wound, he was in love. Stupid, impossible, dangerous love. And he did not know what to do about it, except survive and hope that somehow, against all logic and probability, they would both make it through this war and find a way to build something from the ruins. June brought the final assault on Shuri. The Japanese withdrew from the defensive line. American forces pushed south. Casualties mounted on both sides. The island became the one continuous graveyard. But the end was visible now. The Japanese could not hold, would eventually be pushed into the southern tip of the island and annihilated or forced to surrender. James worked without pause through the carnage. But in quiet moments he thought about Yuki, about dark eyes and steady hands and a voice whispering broken English through pain, about connection across an unbridgeable divide, about hope in a place where hope should be impossible. He did not know if he would ever see her again, did not know if she was alive or dead or transferred to some facility thousands of miles away, did not know if she thought about him or if he had been just another American soldier in a war full of them. But he knew one thing with certainty. Whatever happened next, whatever the war did or did not allow, he would try, would find her if possible, would build that bridge if it could be built, would choose humanity over ideology even if everyone called him traitor. Because in a world dedicated to destroying humanity, choosing to be human felt like the only form of resistance that mattered. And if that made him a fool, then he would be the biggest fool who ever lived and accept the consequences without regret. The guns fired, the wounded screamed, and James Sullivan carried Yuki Nakamura in his heart through every moment of the hell that followed, hoping against hope that somehow they would both survive to see what came after the smoke finally cleared. June 23, 1945. General Mitsuru Ushijima committed ritual suicide in a cave overlooking the southern coast of Okinawa. His chief of staff followed moments later. With their deaths organized, Japanese resistance on the island effectively ended. Scattered pockets of soldiers continued fighting. Holdouts in caves refused to surrender. But the Battle of Okinawa was essentially over. 82 days of combat, over 12,000 American deaths, over 100,000 Japanese military deaths, somewhere between 40 and 150,000 Okinawan civilian deaths. The numbers were so large they lost meaning, just abstract figures in reports that would be filed and forgotten while the survivors tried to piece together lives from the wreckage. James Sullivan had survived, had made it through the meat grinder with only minor wounds, shrapnel scars on his arm, hearing damage from artillery that would ring in his ears for decades. Psychological damage that had no name yet, but would eventually be called combat fatigue or shell shock or post-traumatic stress disorder. But alive, functional, still working as a medic even though the major combat operations had ended. He had not seen Yuki since the explosion, had tried to find information about her, had been told that prisoner records were classified, that he had no authority to access them, that he should focus on his duties and stop asking questions about enemy nationals who were none of his concern. But he continued asking, pulled every contact he had, bribed clerks with cigarettes and chocolate, called in favors from other medics who owed him, and finally in early July learned that Yuki had been transferred to a larger prisoner facility near the northern end of the island, was listed as recovered from her injuries, was scheduled for repatriation to Japan once transportation could be arranged. Repatriation. The word meant she would be sent back to a Japan that was being systematically destroyed by American bombing. Cities reduced to ash, industry demolished, civilian population starving. She would return to a defeated nation with no family, no home, no prospects, nothing except the shame of having been captured by enemies and the struggle to survive in ruins. James could not let that happen, did not know how to prevent it, but knew with certainty that he had to try. In late July, he received unexpected leave. 3 days, the first real time off since landing in April. Officially for rest and recovery. Unofficially because Sergeant Hayes had put in a request citing James's exemplary service and the toll of continuous combat operations. James used the time to travel to the northern facility. Hitched rides on supply trucks, walked when no rides were available. Arrived exhausted but determined at a former Japanese barracks that had been converted into a processing center for prisoners awaiting repatriation. Getting inside required more bribery, more calling in favors, more pushing boundaries of what was allowed. But finally, a sympathetic corporal agreed to let James into the compound for 15 minutes. 15 minutes, the corporal stressed. Then you are gone. I never saw you. This never happened. James walked through rows of temporary shelters, hundreds of prisoners, maybe thousands, all waiting, processing for return to a Japan that no longer existed as they remembered it. He asked for Yuki Nakamura, got blank stares, asked again using her prisoner number, which he had memorized. Finally, someone pointed to a section reserved for women prisoners, and there she was, sitting on a wooden bench outside a barracks, reading something, a book maybe or a letter. Her dark hair was longer than he remembered. The gray uniform had been replaced with simple civilian clothes, probably scavenged or donated. She looked thinner, but alive, healed, real. James approached slowly, not wanting to startle her, not knowing what to say. All the speeches he had rehearsed in his mind fled entirely. He just stood there like an idiot until she looked up and saw him. Her eyes widened, shock, recognition, something else that James desperately hoped was happiness. She stood quickly, almost dropped whatever she was reading, took one step toward him, then stopped, remembered where they were, what they were. Enemy soldier and enemy prisoner. Connection that should not exist. You are alive, she said in careful English. Better English than before. She had been studying, learning, preparing for a future in occupied Japan where English would be the language of power. So, are you, James replied stupidly, because obviously she was alive. She was standing in front of him. But his brain had stopped working properly, could only process the overwhelming relief of seeing her, of confirming she was real and whole and had survived. They stood in awkward silence. Other prisoners watched, guards watched, everyone aware that something unusual was happening, but nobody quite sure what to do about it. I do not have much time, James said. They will make me leave soon. But I needed to see you, needed to know you were okay. Yuki nodded slowly. I am okay. The wound healed. I will be sent to Japan soon. To Hiroshima, maybe. That is where many prisoners are being returned. Hiroshima. The word carried no special significance yet. Was just a city, one of many. But later, when history wrote itself, that word would mean something very different. I do not want you to go, James said. The words came out before he could stop them. Stupid, selfish, impossible, but true. I know I have no right. I know this is crazy, but I do not want you to go back to Japan. I want you to stay with me. I know that makes no sense. I know there is no way it could work, but I had to tell you. Yuki looked at him with those dark eyes that had haunted his dreams for months. Why, she asked simply. Why you care? I am enemy. I am Japanese. I am nothing to you. You are not nothing, James said fiercely. You are everything. I do not know how it happened. I do not know when. But somewhere between the prison compound and the explosion and you almost dying, you became the most important thing in my world. And I know that is insane. I know everyone will say I am crazy, but I do not care. I cannot let you disappear. Tears appeared in Yuki's eyes, first emotion she had shown. In Japan, she said quietly, women who were captured bring shame to family, to nation. I have no family left. My father is dead. My mother is dead. But still there is shame. If I return, I will be marked, contaminated. Nobody will marry me. Nobody will employ me. I will be outcast. But if I stay with you, I will also be outcast. Japanese woman with American man. Betrayer. Traitor. There is no good choice. James took her hand, felt the roughness of her palm, the scars from work and war. Then maybe we are both outcasts together. Maybe that is enough. I cannot promise you easy. I cannot promise you acceptance. But I can promise you that you will not be alone, that whatever comes, we face it together. If you want, if you choose me instead of Japan. The corporal who had let James in appeared. Time's up, Sullivan. You need to leave, now. James ignored him, kept his eyes on Yuki. I am asking you to trust me, to believe that what we have is real, even though it makes no sense, to take a chance on a future that has no guarantee. I know it is too much to ask, but I am asking anyway. Yuki was quiet for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then she squeezed his hand. I will think, she said. I cannot decide now. Too much, too fast, but I will think. James nodded, had to accept that, could not push for more. I will come back, he promised. However I have to, whenever I can, I will come back and we will figure this out. I promise you that. Then the corporal was physically pulling him away, forcing him out of the compound. James looked back, saw Yuki standing there, one hand raised in something between a wave and a farewell, and he knew with certainty that he would keep his promise, would find a way, would make it work even if the entire world said it was impossible. August 6th, 1945. A B-29 bomber called Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The city ceased to exist. 70,000 people died instantly, tens of thousands more in the days and weeks that followed. The world changed in that moment, though nobody fully understood it yet. James heard the news in a briefing, heard about the new weapon, the unprecedented destruction, the implications for ending the war. And all he could think was Yuki was supposed to be sent to Hiroshima. If she had been repatriated already, she would be dead, vaporized, gone. He ran to the processing facility, abandoned his post, did not care about consequences, just ran until his lungs burned and his legs threatened to collapse. Arrived at the compound, demanded to know if prisoners had been sent to Hiroshima. Got conflicting answers. Chaos and confusion because nobody knew what the atomic bomb meant or how to process the implications. Finally found the sympathetic corporal. The Hiroshima transports were delayed, the corporal said. Supply issues. Nobody has left for Japan in a week. Everyone scheduled for Hiroshima is still here. Relief so intense it made James dizzy. She was alive. Still on Okinawa. Still reachable. Still possible. August 9th. Another atomic bomb. This time on Nagasaki. More death, more destruction, more evidence that the war could not continue. August 15th. Emperor Hirohito's voice broadcast across Japan, announcing surrender. The war was over. Officially, completely, finally over. For Japanese prisoners, the news brought complex emotions. Relief that the killing would stop. Shame that Japan had been defeated. Confusion about what came next. But mostly just exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that came from years of fighting and losing and trying to survive in a world that seemed dedicated to destroying you. For James, the emperor's announcement meant opportunity. The rigid structures of wartime were dissolving. Rules that had seemed absolute were becoming flexible. Possibility emerged from the chaos. He went to Sergeant Hayes, laid out the situation plainly. Said he wanted to help Yuki Nakamura stay in occupied Japan under American sponsorship, rather than being repatriated to the ruins. Said he knew it was unconventional, knew it would require paperwork and approvals, knew it would raise eyebrows, but asked if it was possible. Hayes looked at him for a long time, then sighed. You are the stubbornest damn fool I have ever met, Sullivan. But the war is over. Maybe the rules can be bent. I will see what I can do. No promises, but I will try. Over the following weeks, Hayes worked bureaucratic miracles, called in favors, pushed paperwork, explained that Yuki had provided valuable assistance to American medical personnel, that she had saved lives through her nursing skills, that she deserved consideration for her cooperation. Much of it was exaggeration or outright fabrication. But it worked. In early September, James received authorization to travel to the processing facility, to speak with Yuki Nakamura, to present her with an option. She could be repatriated to Japan, given transportation and minimal supplies, sent to a nation in ruins to rebuild her life from nothing, or she could remain in occupied Okinawa under American sponsorship. Work in medical facilities, treating both American personnel and Japanese civilians. Learn English. Build a new life in a new world. The choice was hers. Nobody could force her. Nobody could make her choose one path over another. But if she chose to stay, James would be there, would help her navigate the occupation, would stand beside her despite whatever prejudice or judgment came their way. James found her in the same place as before, sitting on a bench outside the barracks. This time she was not reading, just sitting, staring at the sky, processing everything that had happened, everything that had changed. The war is over, James said as he sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance, not assuming anything. I know, Yuki replied. Japan is defeated. My nation is destroyed. Everything I knew is gone. I am sorry. She looked at him. You won. Your side won. I am sorry for what you lost, James clarified. I am not sorry the war is over. I am not sorry the killing has stopped, but I am sorry for your pain, for what this means for you and your people. Yuki nodded slowly. What will happen to me? James explained the options. Repatriation or staying under American sponsorship. He tried to present both fairly, tried not to push, but she was not stupid. She understood what he was really asking. Understood what choosing to stay would mean, not just practically, but emotionally, the statement it would make, the bridge it would burn. If I stay, she said carefully, I will never be Japanese again. Not truly, I will be contaminated. Traitor, woman who chose Americans over her own people. Yes, James admitted, probably. And if I go back to Japan, I will be marked as captured, as someone who survived when she should have died. I will carry shame, will be outcast anyway. Yes, probably that too. So either way, I am outcast. Either way, I am alone. James took a breath. This was the moment, the choice that would determine everything. You do not have to be alone, he said quietly. If you stay, I stay. I do not know what that means yet. I do not know if we can build something real from this. But I know I want to try. I know that what I feel for you is real. Is more real than anything else I have experienced in this war. And if you feel even a fraction of that, then maybe we have a chance. Yuki was quiet, watching the sky, processing, considering. Finally, she said, I do not love you. Not yet. I do not know you well enough to love you. But I could. I think I could. You are kind. You saw me as human when everyone else saw only enemy. You risked yourself to save me. And in this world where everything is destroyed, maybe that is enough to build on. She turned to face him fully. If I stay, there will be difficulties. Americans will judge you for being with Japanese woman. Japanese will judge me for being with American man. We will be caught between worlds. We'll belong to neither. I know. But maybe, she continued, maybe that is not bad thing. Maybe being between worlds means we can make our own world. New world. Where we are not enemy, but just human. Where we build something honest instead of something based on hatred and lies. James felt hope rising. Fragile. Tentative. But real. So you will stay? Yuki took his hand. Her grip was strong. Steady. I will stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go. Not because I am desperate. but because I choose you, because you chose me when you had every reason not to, and because maybe out of all this destruction, two people can find something worth saving. James wanted to kiss her, wanted to pull her close and celebrate, but he restrained himself. They were in public. Guards watched, other prisoners watched. They had to be careful, had to move slowly, had to build trust before showing affection. So he just squeezed her hand, smiled, and said, "Thank you for trusting me, for taking this chance. I will not let you down. I promise." The following months were difficult. Prejudice followed them everywhere. Other soldiers muttered about Sullivan and his Jap girlfriend. Japanese civilians shunned Yuki as a traitor. They existed in a liminal space accepted by neither side, building their relationship in stolen moments and quiet conversations. But slowly, carefully, they built something real. Yuki worked in a hospital treating wounded Japanese civilians. Her nursing skills were desperately needed. She learned English rapidly, proved herself invaluable, earned grudging respect even from those who disapproved of her relationship with James. James continued working as a medic, helped with the occupation, treated both Americans and Japanese, tried to bridge the divide through medicine and compassion. They married in January of 1946 in a small ceremony with only Sergeant Hayes and two nurses as witnesses. No traditional wedding, no family celebrations, just two people making formal commitment to build a life together, despite everything that said it should be impossible. In the spring of 1946, James received orders to return to the United States. His enlistment was ending. He would be discharged, sent home, and he had a choice: leave Yuki behind, or bring her with him to a country that had spent 4 years hating Japanese people. They chose together, decided that America offered more possibility than occupied Okinawa, that despite prejudice, despite difficulty, they would make a life in Texas, would be pioneers of a sort, would prove that former enemies could build something real together. The journey to America was long, difficult, filled with challenges, but they faced it together. Two people who had met as enemies in the worst battle of the Pacific War, who had found humanity in inhumane circumstances, who had chosen love over hate, bridge over barrier, future over past. They arrived in Austin, Texas in July of 1946. James's family was welcoming but uncertain. The community was suspicious. A Japanese woman in a town where families had lost sons as Japanese soldiers, where propaganda had taught people to hate and fear, where Pearl Harbor and Bataan and the horrors of the Pacific War were fresh wounds. But James and Yuki persevered. He worked as a nurse. She opened a small restaurant serving both American and Japanese food, creating fusion cuisine before it had a name. They had children, built a life, became part of the community through persistence and kindness and the simple fact of being consistently decent human beings. The prejudice never fully disappeared, but it faded gradually as people saw that Yuki was just a woman trying to build a life, as they tasted her food and heard her story and recognized her humanity. As time did what time does, healing wounds in making the urgent grievances of the past seem less important than the practical realities of the present. James lived until 1998, Yuki until 2004. They had 52 years together, raised 3 children who navigated between 2 cultures and created something new, left behind grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried both American and Japanese heritage, proof that the divides of war need not be permanent, that former enemies can become family. In 2005, their daughter donated James's war notebook to the archives at the University of Texas. Researchers found his entries about Okinawa, about the smoke and blood and death, and scattered among the medical notations they found torn pages. Observations about a Japanese prisoner named Yuki, evidence of a connection forming in impossible circumstances. The notebook became part of an exhibit about unlikely love stories from World War II, about how even in the worst circumstances, humanity can find ways to survive, about how choosing to see enemies as human can break cycles of hatred, about how 2 people meeting across an unbridgeable divide somehow built a bridge anyway through determination and hope and the simple decision to try. This is what remains: a notebook with torn pages, a restaurant that still operates in Austin serving fusion cuisine, grandchildren who carry 2 cultures in their blood, and the memory of two people who met as enemies and chose to become something more. The guns fell silent in August 1945, but the real battle continued for decades. The battle to build lives from ruins, to create meaning from suffering, to prove that war does not have to destroy everything, that some things can survive, that love can exist even in places where it should be impossible. James and Yuki won that battle, not through violence, not through conquest, but through the daily decision to honor the connection they found in smoke and blood on an island that tried to destroy them both, through the courage to build a bridge when everyone said the gap was too wide, through faith that humanity is stronger than hatred when given the chance to prove itself. The war ended, life continued, and two people who should have remained enemies became partners, proving that the most powerful force in the world is not weapons or ideology, but the simple human capacity to recognize another person's humanity and choose connection over division, hope over hate, future over past. This is their legacy, not grand, not heroic, just human. Two people who loved each other despite everything that said they should not, who built something beautiful from the ruins of war, who proved that even the bloodiest battles cannot destroy the human capacity for love if people choose to nurture it instead of letting it die. The smoke cleared, the silence came. And in that silence, they found each other and held on tight until death finally separated what war could not destroy, the end.